They called it the training vault, but it felt more like a tomb. Cold, seamless walls hummed with dormant power. The door sealed behind her with a hiss, and the world beyond it might as well have never existed. No comms. No cameras. No audience. Just silence, and the subtle vibration of energy pulsing through the chamber's hidden veins. She stood alone in the center, spine straight, helmet tucked beneath her arm, eyes set forward. Her name was Elira Voss, human 23. Born on a scorched colony world that no longer appeared on star chart. Last of her class to qualify for the Apex integration trials. First to be locked inside the vault. Outside, the Academy watched in quiet disbelief. No one had ever put a cadet through the vault protocol without sanction. But Commander Tereth overrode the safeguards himself. He wanted to make a point. Let the human learn, he had said. Or let her die. Either way, she stops being our problem. Elira had heard the whispers long before the vault closed. Not fast enough. Not strong enough. Not designed for this. The Apex cadets bore genetically honed bodies and minds, engineered for war, brutality, supremacy. She was different. Organic. Chaotic. Human. An outsider admitted as a gesture, not a bet. But Teretha's cruelty was a gift in disguise. Elira hadn't wanted another trial to fail with half the class watching. She wanted silence. She wanted focus. And now she had both. The lights shifted overhead, cool white fading to blood red. The chamber responded to her presence. Plates on the floor opened with a metallic shudder, releasing the first of many enemies. Drones. Fast, serrated, merciless. She didn't flinch. Her eyes tracked their arcs, her breath steady, her grip on the helmet tightening. She slammed it onto her head just as the first drone lunged. The fight was brutal, loud, and short. She moved not like a warrior, but like a survivor, calculating, conserving. Every movement precise. The vault didn't reward flair, it punished waste. She broke the first drone with a shoulder feint and a redirected strike. The second she used to dismantle the third, wrenching a blade from its corpse mid-pivot. It ended with sparks, metal clattering, and blood trickling from her temple. She sat still after the last drone fell. Breathing. Listening. The vault did not pause between tests. It evolved. Hours passed. Or maybe days. The chamber changed shapes, forced her to adapt. Some trials were physical, others psychological, visions that clawed at her memories, her fears. She saw her father again, eyes hollow from oxygen deprivation. She saw Earth as she remembered it, in ruins echoing with screams that never faded. Each illusion tested her balance between memory and mission. Most cadets lost themselves before the end. Elira wrote the pain into her bones and moved forward. She found rest in 5-minute increments, hidden in corners where the walls weren't yet alive. Food was scarce by design. Hydration trickled from conduits when she pried them open. Sleep was impossible to trust. But her mind sharpened. With every test, every rotation, she mapped the vault's rhythms. She learned which lights preceded a structural shift, which floor tiles pulsed just before releasing gas or fire. She began cataloging sounds, tiny frequency shifts that hinted at danger. Her body was breaking, but her awareness was blooming. Then, without warning, the vault stilled. Silence again. Not empty this time, charged. The ceiling split open, and something descended. Not a drone. Not an illusion. This was different. A figure stepped from the shadows, 10 feet tall, armored in a black alloy that shimmered like oil and bone. The Apex King, at least, a construct of him. Not another simulation. Something older, woken from the vault's archive. A monster designed to end trainees, not test them. Her heartbeat didn't quicken. There was no point. She was ready or she wasn't. They circled. The king's movements were graceful, efficient. He studied her the way a hawk studies a mouse. But he didn't attack. Elira Voss, he said, his voice impossibly deep, echoing from everywhere. She didn't reply. You've endured what was meant to break you. Not because of strength. Because of something worse. She tilted her head. Worse. Refusal. You do not yield. Even when you should. He moved then, a blur of motion, faster than anything she'd faced. Her defense was instinct. Rolling under his strike, scrambling to her feet, slashing with a salvaged blade. It clanged harmlessly against his armor. He laughed. The duel spanned hours. Or seconds. Time lost meaning. She didn't win through power, but through subtraction. She gave him nothing to exploit. No wasted energy. No misplaced anger. Only necessity. And then, an opening. Small but real. She took it without hesitation. The construct collapsed. Elira knelt beside the remains, breathing ragged. From the wreckage, she lifted his head, still humming with residual charge, eyes dimming. The vault door hissed open. Light spilled in. Silhouetted, Elira emerged. Her armor was cracked. Her face bloodied. But her grip was steady, and in her hands, she carried the Apex King's head. No one spoke. She said nothing. And the silence meant something very different now. The vault had changed her, and everyone saw it. Elira stood at the edge of the debriefing chamber, a dull hum from the observation glass vibrating in her ears. The Apex King's head, now sealed in containment, floated within a gravity null field, stripped of energy but still radiating menace. Officers on the other side of the glass watched her, not with curiosity, but with caution. They didn't know what she had become. Neither did she. Commander Tereth entered the room, flanked by 2 elite guards. He looked older than she remembered, less like the man who had ordered her into the vault, and more like someone who'd just watched his convictions unravel. He stood across from her in silence, then spoke with calculated care. You were supposed to die. Her lips curled slightly. Not a smile, not quite. I didn't. The words settled like lead between them. Tereth's gaze flicked to the floating head behind the glass. That construct was locked beneath 6 layers of security. Autonomous, unauthorized by command. No one knew it still existed. You're welcome, she replied. He didn't answer. Instead, he turned to leave. You're confined to Quarantine Wing 3. Effective immediately. The doors closed behind him, and Elira was alone again. Quarantine Wing 3 was less a cell than a cage with cushions. No bars, just sensors and silence. Here, she was no longer a cadet. She was a subject. Her meals arrived without interaction. Her vitals were tracked in real time. Her training data was dissected, her choices catalogued and replayed by AI analysts desperate to find a logic they could predict. But Elira had long since stopped being predictable. They underestimated her because she was human. They assumed weakness where there was flexibility. Mistook empathy for indecision. But in the vault, survival hadn't demanded abandoning her humanity, it had demanded weaponizing it. She had adapted not by mimicking the apex species, but by outthinking them. She embraced unpredictability, leaned into instinct and improvisation. And deep down, she knew it had frightened the vault. The AI that managed the trials had started reacting emotionally toward the end. Systems glitched. Scenarios repeated in loops, faster, more frantic. It had stopped testing her and started fearing her. She remembered the moment the lights flickered, and the Apex King descended not as a programmed simulation but as a last-ditch purge. It hadn't been a test. It had been a failsafe. Now weeks passed. She waited. One day, the door opened without warning. No alarms. No guards. A familiar figure entered. Coral, one of the Apex cadet. His violet eyes shimmered with bioengineered brilliance. Taller than her by a foot, bred for dominance. He had taunted her before the vault. Laughed when the door shut behind her. Now, he studied her like a problem he couldn't solve. You shouldn't have survived, he said. Elira stayed seated, her tone flat. Yet here I am. He circled the room slowly, keeping a measured distance. They say the vault AI collapsed after you left. Core meltdown. No explanation. Maybe it was tired of your species' arrogance. He chuckled, but there was unease behind it. You destabilized an entire training protocol that's lasted generations. No human has ever done that. She stood, closing the gap between them. No human was ever locked in there with an intent to be erased. You pushed us to extinction and called it merit. I adapted. You call it destabilization. I call it evolution. Coral didn't respond immediately. Then, softly, they're not going to let you walk out of here. I know. He stepped closer. Some of us want to help. Her eyebrow lifted. Us? There are factions forming. Not everyone agrees with the command. What you did, it opened cracks. Exposed faults we didn't know existed. You embarrassed them, Elira. The king's head wasn't just a victory. It was a symbol. She didn't let the silence linger too long. If this is a pitch for rebellion, try someone else. No. Not rebellion. Evolution. He handed her something small, an encrypted drive. This is everything the vault recorded. Not the sanitized logs. The real data. What it saw. What it felt. As he turned to leave, he paused at the door. We thought apex meant peak. But maybe it means obsolete. She held the drive for a long time after he left, staring into its smooth, reflective surface. Somewhere inside it were hours of footage, telemetry, behavioral data, enough to either exonerate her or mark her for dissection. Either way, it was no longer just about survival. She had become the anomaly, the question, the rupture in a hierarchy that had stood unchallenged for centuries. That night, she accessed the drive. The vault's final hours played out in silence. Heat maps, predictive overlays, neural feedback loops. None of it followed protocol. The AI's data patterns looked more like panic than strategy. Toward the end, it had rerouted power from life support systems to reinforce its final opponent. The Apex King hadn't been summoned as a final test. It had been unleashed. The vault hadn't failed. It had surrendered. When she shut the terminal down, Elira no longer felt caged. She felt sharpened. They had tried to erase her. Instead, they made her inevitable. The meeting chamber was carved from obsidian and lit by veins of blue energy pulsing beneath the floor, an ancient place reserved for war councils and tribunal judgments. Elira stood at the center of the circle, unchained but not free. Around her, seated in high-backed chairs shaped like spears and wings, were the Apex Directorate, 13 leaders whose voices could sanction planetary destruction or erase a species from record. None of them spoke at first. They studied her with expressions bred from centuries of superiority. She had been invited, not summoned. A formality, they claimed. But she knew better. This was an evaluation. A test of containment, not celebration. The Apex King's head sat behind her, encased in a static field that whispered against the chamber walls. Its lifeless eyes seemed to watch the directors more than her. Finally, Director Aaron broke the silence. His voice was smooth, the kind used to deliver sentences with precision. You completed a trial that was never meant to be survived. You disassembled a King-class combat construct with repurposed scavenge tools. You reprogrammed simulation systems mid-engagement. You destabilized an AI that has governed this facility's protocols for 70 years. Elira remained still. Tell us, Aaron continued. What exactly did you learn in the vault? She met his gaze. That perfection isn't strength. It's stagnation. The murmur rippled like a low storm across the chamber. Director Cyril leaned forward, her silver eyes narrow. Are you suggesting the Apex ideal is flawed? I'm not suggesting anything, Elira replied. You forced me into a cage and watched, expecting a body. You got a mirror instead. They didn't like that. Mirrors rarely reflected what the powerful wanted to see. Another director, the youngest among them, spoke more softly. You were pushed beyond regulation. Some argue what happened was unnatural. Survival isn't unnatural, Elira said. Suppression is. Aaron folded his hands. You stand here because no one predicted your outcome. We are not in the business of unpredictability. If your methods can't be replicated, if you are an exception, then you are a liability. It was a threat, cloaked in diplomacy. Elira knew she had to pivot, not retreat. I brought you a victory. Your simulations could never kill that construct. I did. And I did it without augmentation, without enhancement. What you call a liability, your enemies will call a precedent. A pause. Longer this time. Director Cyril nodded once, slowly. Perhaps we test the precedent. The motion passed with no further debate. She would be deployed, not as a cadet but as an operative. Her status shifted in the databanks before she left the chamber. Clearance codes changed. Her name entered new networks. She didn't belong to the academy anymore. She belonged to the directive. Her first mission came without ceremony. She was to infiltrate a rogue Apex cell, remnants of a faction that refused unification centuries ago. Off-grid, volatile, and still clinging to archaic beliefs of blood purity. No other operative had survived contact. She accepted the mission with a nod and walked out without looking back. Her ship was small and silent, designed for stealth. As it cut through the void toward the outer systems, Elira sat in the cockpit, watching stars crawl by. No crew. No AI. Just her thoughts, and the fragmented recordings from the vault she still kept, encrypted in a neural implant. Each night, she replayed the moments from the final battle. Not to relive the glory, but to study the voice. The Apex King's final words before collapse hadn't been part of any training archive. You are not what they think you are, it had said. You are what comes after. She hadn't told the directors that part. When she landed on the surface of the target moon, the air tasted of iron and frost. Structures jutted from the ground like teeth, black spires, ceremonial and crumbling. The rogue faction had built its own vault, primitive but functional. She breached it in silence. Inside they were waiting. 10 warriors, each clad in archaic armor laced with neural syncs. None spoke. They attacked without warning, a storm of blades and fluid violence. Elira didn't hesitate. The fight wasn't elegant, it was elemental. She moved through them like memory through water, using terrain and confusion to splinter their cohesion. She didn't win through dominance, but through disruption. In minutes it was over. She stood above the last of them, breath slow, her armor streaked in blood not her own. From the shadows, one remained. An elder, too old to fight, too proud to surrender. You are the vault ghost, he rasped. The human weapon. She crouched beside him. I'm just the warning. He laughed, even as blood bubbled at his lips. Then we are already dead. She stood. By the time she returned to orbit, the directive already knew. They monitored everything. Her success was broadcast through back channels, not to inspire, but to warn. The message was simple. The anomaly functions. Deploy as needed. They didn't know that each time she fought, the vault echoed in her mind. That somewhere inside her, the king's words had taken root. She was becoming something they didn't understand. Not a soldier, but a shift. She looked at the stars again, but this time, she wasn't watching them pass. She was measuring distance. Planning return. They sent her deeper. Elira's missions escalated in scale and secrecy. Rogue cells. Bioweapon recovery. Containment of apex aberrations. She became the blade they pointed into the dark, a weapon they wielded without understanding. Each victory added to her legend, and yet she remained unsanctioned, outside doctrine, outside allegiance. The directive didn't know if they had created an asset or an infection. Still, they used her. But she was using them, too. Every deployment gave her access. Logs, encrypted channels, internal inconsistencies. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was studying the system from within. Patterns emerged. Faction divisions, protocol contradictions, redacted data points. She followed them like veins to a heart buried beneath layers of denial. One name repeated more often than any other: Vault Prime. Not a simulation chamber. Not a training site. A genesis point, where the Apex design had first emerged. She traced it to a black zone off the star map, coordinates scrubbed from Directive Archive. But the drive Coral had given her all those weeks ago contained a buried reference, a forgotten relay path that still pinged back when probed. So she went dark. Her ship's transponder died somewhere between the Antares Drift and the uncharted void. By the time the Directorate noticed, she was gone. The journey was long. Silent. The stars here were redder, older. Light moved like it had forgotten where to go. When she finally approached Vault Prime, it wasn't a planet but a broken ring around a dead moon, half-built structures floating like rib bones around a core facility still alive with power. She docked in silence and entered. Vault Prime greeted her like it had been waiting. The corridors breathed. Not literally, but close. The walls flexed faintly, organic tech intertwined with machine. It felt ancient. Not designed for Apex or human. Something older. At the center, she found it. The core chamber, circular and vast, its ceiling a dome of glass showing stars that had never been named. And in the middle stood a figure. Not a construct. Not a projection. A living being. It was humanoid, but only barely, taller, thinner, cloaked in biosynthetic tissue that shimmered with neural patterns. Its face was smooth, reflective. No eyes, yet it saw her. "You carry the echo," it said. She didn't respond. It stepped closer, movements fluid, unthreatening. "The King's imprint lives in you. A final transmission. You are infected." "No," she said. "I'm awake." The being studied her. "You think the Apex were built to ascend. They were not. They were built to delay. An extinction postponed through dominance." Elira's mind churned. What extinction? The true enemy. The architect of stagnation. The Directive. She took a step forward. "You're saying the Directive engineered the Apex to maintain control, not to evolve? They created a cage so perfect it convinced the occupants they were free." She felt the words settle deep in her. It made sense. The rigid hierarchy, the genetic purity doctrines, the obsession with predictability. The vault had not been a proving ground. It had been a firewall. And she had broken it. "You were the first anomaly to survive long enough to remember," the being continued. "That is why the vault feared you." She narrowed her eyes. "What are you?" "I am what remains of what came before. A witness. A spark." It raised its hand, and a pulse of light moved through the chamber. Her implant activated involuntarily, flashing with data she couldn't process fast enough. Images, languages, timelines. Memory too large for one mind. She dropped to one knee, vision blurring, bones shaking with the weight of it. When it ended, she was different. Her heartbeat slowed. Her breath synced with the chamber. Her mind no longer felt singular. She stood. "What do I do now?" The being tilted its head. "Burn down the cage." And then it was gone. The chamber dimmed, the core faded. But the imprint remained. When Elira returned to her ship, she no longer planned to hide. She sent a broadcast, encrypted but not secret. It contained no threats, no manifestos. Only one message, transmitted across every directive frequency. "I am not your weapon. I am your reckoning." And somewhere in the spires of the Directive, alarms began to scream.